National Park Service, Lincoln Home National Historic Site.
Hello everyone, and happy Women's History Month. This month we'll be continuing our Reading with a Ranger series, but instead with an emphasis on some historic American women whose stories you may be less familiar with. Today we will be learning about one of America's most famous First Ladies, Jackie Kennedy, and her often overlooked role in historic preservation. Historic preservation is the preservation, conservation, and protection of historically significant places, buildings, items, and objects. In other words, historic preservation is the protection and keeping in good condition of places and things which are important to our history, places such as the Lincoln Home. Today's story, When Jackie Saved Grand Central, highlights not only the difficulty and importance of preserving places such as the Lincoln Home, but also highlights the determination, perseverance, and passion of one of America's most iconic women, Jackie Kennedy. Now, without further ado, let's get started.
Reading with a Ranger, Women's History Month 2021. Ranger sitting in the Lincoln Home sitting room, reading a book.
Come and sit near, the adventure is here, because it's Reading with a Ranger.
When Jackie Saved Grand Central, the true story of Jacqueline Kennedy's fight for an American icon. Written by Natasha, illustrated by Alexandra, Boiger.
Drawing of John F. Kennedy. Jackie, a young child, a baby standing in bleak gray and red colored room.
When Jackie became First Lady of the United States in 1961, she moved into the White House with President John F. Kennedy and their children. The president's residence was the most famous house in the country, but Jackie was dismayed to find it as run down as an old hotel. The walls needed painting, the furniture was shabby, and there were very few mementos of America's great leaders.
Jackie and John at large wooden rectangular desk. Jackie with a tall gold candle holder. And Jackie looking at a large hanging chandelier in octahedron.
Jackie tracked down lost presidential treasures. The desk used by Rutherford B. Hayes, candelabras purchased by James Monroe, and a chandelier bought by Ulysses S. Grant.
Did you know? As First Lady, Jackie Kennedy helped found the White House Historical Association and helped establish the White House not just as a presidential residence, but also as a museum reflecting American presidential history.
Room by room, she restored the dreary mansion into a stately home that made Americans proud. 14 years later, another famous landmark, this time in New York City, needed Jackie Kennedy's help.
Interior of Grand Central Station, with golden walls and blue ceiling.
Grand Central was the largest and grandest railroad terminal in the world on the day it opened in 1913. Some called it a work of art, with its pink marble steps, majestic sculptures, dazzling chandeliers, towering windows, and cerulean vaulted ceiling painted with gold leaf constellation.
Outside front face of Grand Central Station is made of white stone with tall paned windows, green roof, and a marble statue and a clock at the top.
Over the years, Grand Central blossomed into the gateway to the city that never sleeps. At the peak of train travel in the 1940s, it brought 65 million passengers in and out of New York City every year. But it was more than just a place to pass through. Grand Central was where politicians gave speeches, movies were filmed, revelers danced on New Year's Eve, and New Yorkers ate lunch. Artist Andy Warhol even threw an underground party there.
Jackie as a child standing in a park in a bright, blown-out view of New York City.
Jackie had taken the train countless times to and from Grand Central. It stood close to where she had grown up on Park Avenue and was at the heart of the glamorous city. After her time in Washington, D.C. ended, Jackie moved back to New York City to live among the parks, museums, and magnificent buildings she adored.
3 men in suits standing in front of the tall print of a skyscraper against a bold red background.
By the time Jackie returned, Grand Central had been at risk of losing its magnificence. Its owners wanted to build a skyscraper right on top of it. New Yorkers were outraged. Their building must be protected.
Crowd of people next to Grand Central Station, with the Statue of Liberty in the background. A hand with a federal eagle symbol in the foreground.
Luckily, the government agreed. The New York City Landmarks Law was enacted, giving the city a legal means to save its architecture. Grand Central was designated a landmark, and no one could change it. New Yorkers sighed in relief.
Jackie in a dark dress, looking nervous, reading a newspaper in front of Grand Central Station.
Yet, Grand Central's owners were determined to build their skyscraper, so they filed a lawsuit with the state of New York. To the surprise of many, the judges ruled that the city was wrong to keep the owners from making money. He not only gave them permission to build their skyscraper, he said they could completely demolish Grand Central. The New York Times ran a front-page story calling Grand Central one of the most influential pieces of urban design of the 20th century. Jackie read the article and couldn't believe what was happening. To her and many others, destroying Grand Central would be an architectural mutilation. When Jackie had renovated the White House, she realized how much Americans cared about their history. New Yorkers didn't want to lose this link to their city's past either. So Jackie wasn't going to let that happen.
Jackie in a red coat and dark sunglasses, with a group of people holding signs saying, "Save Grand Central."
Like a powerful locomotive, Jackie led the charge to preserve the landmark she and other New York City residents loved. She joined city leaders and founded the Committee to Save Grand Central. She spoke at press conferences and made headlines. She inspired citizens to donate money. When people across the United States saw their fashionable former First Lady championing her cause, New York City's fight became America's fight.
Jackie sitting alone at table, writing, in dark blue room.
Jackie also wrote a letter to Mayor Abraham Beame, saying, Is it not cruel to let our city die by degrees, stripped of all her proud monuments, until there is nothing left of her history and beauty to inspire our children? She convinced the mayor to reject the court's decision and file an appeal. The campaign to save Grand Central would go back to court.
Jackie in red in front of a golden vision of Grand Central Station. In background are justices in black, sitting at a high counter against red background. To her left are the men in suits with the skyscraper print.
New York City won the appeal, as well as another that followed. New Yorkers cried, "No more bites out of the Big Apple." It looked as if the beautiful Buick's Art Building would be saved once and for all. But the fight wasn't over. The railroad owners took their case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, whose ruling would be absolutely final.
Drawing of train route along eastern coast with labeled stops of specific cities. At each city is a crowd of people with balloons and signs.
In a last-ditch effort to drum up support, Jackie boarded a special train called the Landmark Express. More than 300 supporters joined her on the Whistle Stop Crusade, traveling through stations in New York, Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore. Together they made tracks for Washington, D.C., hoping to gain attention for their cause in the place where the Supreme Court's decision would be made.
Group of people playing golden trumpets with blue balloons above them.
What a party the journey was! It was a nonstop celebration of Grand Central. Mimes, musicians, clowns, and fire-eating jugglers performed on board. Volunteers handed out blue and white Safe Grand Central balloons, t-shirts, and buttons, while Jackie strolled through the train cars, thanking fellow passengers personally.
Jackie, wearing natural colors, stands in crowd of reporters and Grand Central Station supporters.
When the Landmark Express pulled into Washington, fans and politicians swarmed Union Station to witness the return of the former First Lady to the nation's capital, and to demonstrate. If Grand Central Station goes, said Jackie to the press, all of the landmarks in this country will go as well.
Jackie, wearing red, paces anxiously in front of Grand Central Station.
Jackie was worried. She had spent 3 years doing all she could to save Grand Central. Yet the building's fate was now in the hands of the Supreme Court justices. This was the first time in history that the highest court in the nation had heard a case about historic preservation. It would not be an easy decision. For 2 months, everyone anxiously waited.
Against cerulean background, Jackie stands in front of a crowd of Grand Central Station, her hands up in celebration.
Then, on June 26, 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court announced its ruling. The city of New York had won the case. Grand Central was saved, a victory for history.
In Red Room, Jackie sitting in front of drawing of Grand Central with 2 men in suits.
One battle was over, but another would soon begin. How could the neglected Grand Central be brought back to its former splendor? Architects studied original drawings and photos from the building's heyday and came up with a master plan, which Jackie enthusiastically supported.
2 men in hard hats adjusting a large golden clock.
It took almost $200 million and teams of craftsmen to get the job done. Nearly 2 decades passed before Grand Central shone once again.
Interior of the crowded Grand Central Station is bright, glowing colors.
And shine it did. New pink marble steps have been crafted. Sculptures at the grand 42nd Street entrance were restored. Gold chandeliers had been stripped of their grime, and paint and dirt were removed from the towering windows. The interior was flooded with light once again. Even the ceiling, blackened from decades of soot and tobacco smoke, were carefully cleaned, revealing its cerulean color and gold constellations.
View of ground floor at Grand Central Station with crowd of people holding balloons.
When Grand Central was rededicated in 1998, 5,000 people gathered in the main concourse. Most New Yorkers had never seen Grand Central looking so glorious, and it was time to celebrate.
Image of a passerby looking at bronze plaque on the wall.
Yet one person was missing. Jackie had died 4 years earlier. Many people honored her memory by visiting Grand Central to write messages in memorial books and linger in the beautiful space she had helped preserve. Today, Vanderbilt Hall and its entry foyer feature commemorations about Jackie so that no one will ever forget her role.
View of Grand Central Station with people taking pictures and sightseeing.
The fight to save Grand Central changed how people viewed old buildings. Rather than tearing them down, preservationists now had a model for how to save historic buildings all over the country, protecting our precious heritage. Grand Central remains one of the grandest and most famous destinations in the world. Every day, it welcomes New Yorkers going to work, tourists visiting the sites, friends meeting for lunch. All because Jackie Kennedy and many others came together to save a landmark they loved. The end. Although America is one of the relatively younger countries in the world, we are still rich with history. It is thanks to people like Jackie Kennedy who understand the importance of historic preservation that places like the Lincoln Home are still around today. Historic preservation allows us to learn from and interpret stories of our past so that we can find inspiration and make the best possible decisions for our future. What is a place that is important to you or you think that deserves to be preserved for future generations? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Reading with a Ranger, and we look forward to seeing you next week where we look at another famous First Lady.
Book featured When Jackie Saved Grand Central, the true story of Jacqueline Kennedy's fight for an American icon. Written by Natasha Wing, illustrated by Alexandra Boiger, published by Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt. Music by Isaiah Frater and Lori Hoffman. Edited by Jasmine Long. Photos from the Library of Congress. Learn more about Jacqueline Kennedy at www.jfklibrary.org/learn/about JFK / life of Jacqueline B Kennedy about historic preservation at www.nps.gov/subjects/historic preservation /index.htm. National Park Service, Lincoln Home National Historic Site.